Welcome back on board the Starship. I'm talking with Anthony Beckett, who is the organiser of this year's Exopolitics conference at Leeds University in a few weeks' time. Now, we were talking about day 2 of the conference, which is the Saturday, Richard Dolan. Following Richard Dolan is a guy called Bryce Zabel. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes, that's right.
So, Life After Contact. Is this guy another contactee?
No. Bryce Zabel is a Hollywood producer.
Right.
He's worked on Hollywood movies and TV. He worked with Steven Spielberg on the TV miniseries Taken, and he produced the TV series Dark Skies in the mid-90s, which was the one that, well, it was kind of set in the kind of 1950s, if you remember that one. So Bryce Zabel basically wrote, about a year ago, he contacted Richard Dolan, who started communicating about a project, talking about a project they're going to work on, and end up writing a book together. And so the book was called After Disclosure. And
sort of trying to forecast what life would be like, what changes will be made if UFO disclosure came about by governments.
Yeah, it's kind of a, because the last thing humanity wants is to kind of go blindly into the future without actually considering what could happen in certain scenarios. So what these two guys have done is basically look at various scenarios, how disclosure could happen, how governments respond, how other organisations and corporations will respond just to. Okay,
now the final speaker on day 2 is Richard C. Hoagland.
Yeah.
And he's a contributor to Coast AM, which is the American radio show which discusses all things UFO. And what's he going to be talking about? Because I notice here it says title to be announced.
Yes, we kind of only confirmed him a few weeks ago, so we're not sure what he's going to be speaking about just yet. It probably might be following on from his Amsterdam talk. I don't know. His secret,
right, which was about 9/11.
It was at the Secret Space Program. Right. But it's up to him. I mean, he's just not decided yet, I guess.
Right.
But Richard was like Richard C. Hoagland was basically one of the lead guys with the Mars investigation team, which was investigating in the mid-80s. They were the first ones to start looking seriously at the face of Mars and then evidence for artificiality and Cydonia. And it's come a long way since then. Basically being more of a kind of, I don't know what you call it, a watchdog for NASA more than anything else.
Yeah, he used to work for NASA.
Yeah, he was a consultant, wasn't he, at one point? And he worked, I think he was working for one of the news agencies when the Viking missions happened in the late 70s. Right. So he was in the media at that point. Okay. Well, so yeah, he could, not quite sure what he'd be presenting on his time, but you can expect a full house on that day.
Right, you think? Yeah. Good. Okay, so day 3 is about contact cases and, well, just contact in general, people who claim to have had contact. And the first speaker is Gerard Artson, who's going to be talking about George Adamski. Yeah. Now, this George Adamski was the story of this elderly-ish guy in the 1950s who claimed that he was taken on board a craft, and they said they were from Venus and all of this stuff, and he went to the moon in this craft, and he took photos of it and everything. Yeah. Where do you stand on the Adamski story, Anthony?
Gerard, the guy who's giving this lecture, I first met him at our conference
last year.
You met
well,
too.
Yeah.
And I have to say I was like skeptical. I was skeptical of everything, but when it came to George Adamski, I just kind of I saw him as maybe. I think I first read about him in Timothy Good's books, Above Top Secret, and my view was that it's possible he had encounters, but some of the things he was coming out with were so far out there, I just couldn't accept it. To me, it just sounded made up. So I made a blanket assumption that it must have been just made up. And in recent years, and I've started reading some of Gerard's book actually, and I'm seeing this now. What he's talking about is more of a spiritual kind of. Some of his experiences I'm understanding now. Some of Adamski's experiences seem to be
non-physical.
The non-physical, the etherical, out-of-body type of scenarios. I mean, they were very, very much closer. There's kind of a grey area between this in the UFO abduction literature about there is. You're never quite sure whether it's like a real physical thing or just kind of meeting with space brothers in the ether or something. Anyway, I'm beginning to see a lot more in the Adamski's case of the basis.
What about the photograph, the film of the craft hovering above the garden where it's actually changing its shape? I mean, that's not been debunked yet, has it? I don't, to my knowledge, no one can explain.
I think that was 53 or something like that.
The craft seemed to change shape, which is presumably, if it's genuine, it's to do with its propulsion.
Some kind of field propulsion.
Yeah, it's a field effect, of some kind of. Yeah.
I mean, as I say, it's 1950s. How would you fake that if you were going to fake it in the 50s?
Yeah.
Why would you fake it as well? That's another question. Because there's, but basically, I don't know. I mean, what I do know is that back in the 50s, there were terrestrial developments of flying saucers that were being made, and so there are multiple ways for that not to be ET. But I should say I don't know. I see his evidence as being one guy telling his story and first-hand experiences, and you take them as they are. One of the points about the Sunday part of the conference is that there are so many. It's trying to emphasise there are so many people who claim contact with extraterrestrials or others or whatever. I don't always call them extraterrestrials. I don't know that any single one of them is true,
right?
And I can never prove that either. But what we're seeing is in a society we've got a pattern of these things. These things are out there. People are out there making these claims, and that's why we're dealing with that on this platform.
All right. So Richard Lawrence is the next speaker in his talk is entitled UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message.
Yeah. Richard Lawrence is the, I forget what his title is, he's one of the lead guys in the Etheria Society. And the Etheria Society was an organisation formed by basically one of George Adams's contemporaries, a guy called George King from the UK. I remember I went to Steve Bassett's conference in Washington, D.C. in 2004, and I met some people. I mean, there's really interesting stuff, but I'm more of a nuts and bolts man. I like to be able to kind of prove and weigh evidence and stuff. And there were people coming to me talking about the Alliance for Humanity and this kind of thing. I had no idea how to take that information, talking about channeled information. But the point, I mean, I've avoided it as a subject within the conference. I've avoided it for quite a long time.
Right.
But I need to address it. I don't want to throw out the babe with the bathwater and all that. So. Right. We're dealing with it this year. Okay,
and David Griffin is going to speak about who speaks for humanity in the contact scenario.
Yeah, initially, actually, we had David on the Saturday because it was military based. He was discussing the concept of whether, is contact with the military and this contact with the military.
Haven't the UN appointed someone?
That was it was from
a doctor.
Forget
someone.
I know what you mean, but it was announced, but she basically said it wasn't true, and I think it's been retracted as that.
Was she an astrophysicist?
I think so. Yeah, they were claiming that
the UN had appointed her as the person who was going to speak if extraterrestrials came to the Earth. Was that so? That wasn't true then.
It kind of was true, but I think the context was spun by the media.
Right.
So it wasn't. Her job wasn't going to shake the hands of the guy coming out the flying saucer. It was basically.
They already did that in 1954 with President Eisenhower.
Yeah. But basically, I think what they'd actually realised, it was her job title was real. She was there to look at certain kind of things.
Right.
And I think they got cold feet because of the way the media dealt with the story, basically. Right. So they kind of pulled the story. Okay. But that's kind of what it would have meant had it been taken literally.
All right. So the next speaker on the contact scenario is Steve Jones, whose book, it's another green book, so it's not going to show up very well. An Invitation to the Dance, which is it's basically his life story and about his abduction experiences. And he does have a YouTube channel, and I would recommend anyone to go on that YouTube channel. It's very interesting, and as is the book. I mean, there's some of the explanations of when and how he was taken and what was going on, and it's incredible, really. I mean, some people would just say, right, it's just all in his imagination. But if you read that book, it's difficult to just put it down to purely that. There's physical evidence involved, etc. I mean, do you know much about Steve Jones? Have you met him?
No, I've spoken to him. I haven't met him in person.
Right. Okay.
But no, I've got his book and stuff, and I haven't finished reading it yet. Right. But it's one of those it just strikes me as like a kind of such a honest guy.
Person, yeah, exactly.
It's
Now the next speaker is Bridget Grant, who appeared at this conference, the UFO conference in 2001 with Nick Pope.
Yeah, that would be the Graham Birdsall's conference that we are using this in.
And there's been articles about her in the Sun in the past, I believe, and she seems to work alongside Nick Pope, which is a bit. He's this nuts and bolts MOD man. There's no such thing as UFOs. Yet he's working with this contactee. Can you explain that, Anthony?
I can't. I can't really explain that part of it, no. But but without talking too much about Nick, I actually saw Nick on. He was on. Was it UFO Hunters or some old series I watched on? I think it was on Virgin. And Nick did say he was actually talking about real aliens. So it seems to be in recent years Nick is kind of a bit more stuck on UFOs, unidentified, don't know what it is. Whereas I'm not quite sure how to take him sometimes. But on this day, he's actually standing up there and is interviewing Bridget, who is an acclaimed abductee.
Right.
So he'll be asking her questions based on testimony. And
okay.
stuff. So yeah,
he's got his foot in several camps. Do you know what I mean? You don't quite know. You know, he won't come out and say yes, UFOs are real. You know that he believes that. He just says things like, "We can't rule it out," and things like that. You know. Anyway, the next speaker is Kim Carlsberg, Close Encounters, and what's she going to be speaking about?
Well, Kim is actually she's an author of 2 books now. She wrote about her own experiences, and it was actually illustrated by an artist with some really good illustrations. It was a really popular book, and within the community of people who are in the who basically are experiencers, there is a community of people out there and look out for each other's work. And this book was really popular, and it inspired a lot of people to be comfortable and confident about what their experiences are. So they might not be able to they might not be able to talk with the immediate family, for example, about their experiences, but there was a support network of people who could talk to and feel less weird with, basically, because it was it basically was empowering abductees, basically, and contactees.
I mean, I've been given quite a lot of footage from Miles Johnson, Dave Hodrian, and is it Suzanne Summerscales? Joanne Summerscales. Yeah. They've filmed quite a lot of abductee testimony, and a lot of it's very moving, you know, and it's quite harrowing, some of it. So some of that's going to be featured on this show in the coming months. And, you know, it's difficult to watch their testimonies and just pass it off as their imaginations. It really is. And you have to see it in order to make a judgment. Okay, so moving on to the final speaker, who is like Mr. Disclosure, Steve Bassett. Disclosure: who, what, why, when, where, and how.
Yeah, it's a bit of a vague title. Right. Steve is an advocate for disclosure by governments. I think he stood in the elections in Maryland to try and get on the ballot for elections in Maryland.
So he stood on the ticket of UFO disclosure, but he didn't get elected, though.
No, it's just an odd little one of those little weird things that happen. I think it was actually at the time of the elections and the canvassing, and there was what they call the Beltway sniper, and so that took all the media off him. Right. It's basically some I don't know the story, but basically some high-profile shooting incident by some sniper taking pot shots at people. Just happened to happen when he was doing really well. So it didn't get coverage.
He was at the 2001 Disclosure Project conference. He was there, I think. I remember seeing him on the film.
He was involved with that project, actually, with Greer. Yeah. But since then days, I mean, what happened there with the Disclosure Project, Greer, 9/11 happened, basically, and they kind of went their separate ways and focused on other angles. Steve Bassett in 2004 put on his first X conference, which was the first Exopolitics conference, and that was in Gettysburg near DC. And I think it was last year, moved to the centre of Washington DC for the first time. So Steve Bassett's been he's one of the lead advocates for disclosure and exopolitics to be taken seriously as a subject. And so in his talk, obviously, he's going to be covering what's happened in the last, recent history. Within disclosure, what could drive disclosure.
And he campaigned, he used to get people to send faxes to the White House.
Yeah, the fax on Washington.
Please
stuff.
Tell us about the truth about UFOs, Mr. President, and fax that.
The argument being, like, if you get them en masse, but people start taking them not seriously, but they have to start paying attention and being representative to, representing their constituents, basically.
He calls it the truth embargo, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I call it lies.
Yeah.
So he's kind of wanting to forgive them in a way, isn't he? He's kind of like, oh, come on, government, we'll be nice to you. We'll not call you liars if you tell us the truth about disclosure.
It's like, okay,
we're on our side.
Yeah, it's like an amnesty. Like, we'll get let
an amnesty, that's a good word.
It's like, we'll let you off with this, just come clean, it's fine. But one of the things that I'm trying to emphasise with this conference is the diversity ideas what people think disclosure is. I mean, the tagline for the conference is "This is disclosure."
This is disclosure.
I mean, Steve Bassett thinks disclosure is, with a capital D disclosure as he calls it, is Obama or Cameron standing up and saying, "Yeah, this ETs are here," whatever. Whereas Nick Pope contends that and says that disclosure won't happen like that. It's simply ongoing, always going to be happening through leaks in the media. Richard Hoagland's perspective is more along the lines of, it's actually quite similar to Nick's, that it's ongoing, but it's not driven by the government at all. It's
difficult if you've got such little faith in the government. For example, Obama stands up and says that they've killed Osama bin Laden, and I don't believe that for 1 second. I believe he was killed, or no, he died of Marfan syndrome, as reported by Dr. Steve Pieczenik in 2001. So if Obama's standing up and telling those barefaced lies, who would believe him about UFOs? You know,
I think the difference between the concepts of what disclosure is really comes down to what the people's worldviews are. For example, if you believe that the most highest power in the United States is the United States government, then you're going to be doing what Steve Bassett does. You're going to be asking, you'll be writing to your representatives within your state and then in the US government. However, if you think that there's more control, that corporations have got more power, you're going to be a little more cynical about what your government can do about it. And then there are those who...
Military intelligence, you've got that as well, which is separate from government in many ways.
Well, so, completely separate. It's like I mean, who was it? I forget one of the... I think it was Clinton who referred to it as a satellite government, effectively.
Yeah, government. There's a government within the government that he has no control over. That's what Clinton said. Yeah.
Clinton. Yeah, I think it was Eisenhower who said used the term satellite government.
Yeah.
So I mean, coming back to Richard Dolan's work about the national security state, what happened when post Second World War, 1947, was there was an issue obviously with flying saucers in 1952 being seen over the DC, and people reported them. The military were seeing them, and it was regarded as the most highly classified subject, even higher than the H bomb, which was reported. Well, how was that dealt with within intelligence, within the government? Well, they basically took a piece of the government, sectioned it off, kept it completely separate, and that's a satellite government. And rest of American politics went on as normal. The problem is this section became more powerful, and now is encroaching everything else within society. Yeah. And it was possibly, this is why Richard Dolan thinks that this is the one issue that has caused basically it's driven the 20th century and obviously until to now.
And I mean that cabal, if you call it a cabal, is, in my opinion, is orchestrating all of the false flag terrorist attacks that we have, and it has created this mythical
Well, it's an
Al-Qaeda.
interwoven network in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm going to be saying things that some people might not want to hear at this conference, you know, about that, but I don't really care, to be honest. We're being lied to all over the place, and that needs to stop. And people need to see those lies, in my opinion, in order to get to the truth. But it is an interesting point. Who are you going to trust to disclose? If you don't trust the president, you don't trust the military, you don't trust the secret societies. You know,
it's kind of like what is disclosure when it happens as well. I mean, just because it's, I mean, if there's a disclosure event, let's say, like maybe on August 12th next year above the Olympic Games in London, something happens and there's like a mass sighting, hypothetically. If that was to happen and so enough people saw something that you can't possibly deny it, the government would have to kind of say something just to keep credibility. If you ignore it too much, maybe the media would be saying too much. Anyway, so what would happen is that the government would have to make an announcement. But how do you disclose something? How do you tell the world about the 50 years or 60 years of lies? So, I mean, even if you wanted to tell the entire truth, you might not be able to, because the government in power at that time doesn't have the information.
Yes.
So there's a lot of, that's one of the, that's obviously one of the subjects we're going to be covering at the conference, really. Okay,
and it is the biggest issue on the planet as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now where can people get tickets, Anthony, if they want to come to this event? They're all there. Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much for coming on board.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Telling us about some. You know, it is a fantastic lineup that you've managed to put together, and I know that you've put a lot of work in getting all of these people, the travel arrangements, accommodation arrangement. It's a lot of work, And, you know, I'm really appreciative of that work, and also Rachel as well. Okay, so thanks very much indeed, Anthony. And it just remains for me to say, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your feet on the ground, and tell all your friends about this show.